Hello, and welcome back to the Chris Macpherson Show. Another episode coming into you, all the black and white on your sporting landscape. No grey opinions here. I'm looking forward to getting into another huge episode. We're going to get around the grounds. We're going to talk football. We're going to talk NFL. We're going to talk motorsport, cricket, basketball, and then round it out with some Aussie soccer as well. There's lots to get through. We're in NBA trade season. The NFL Super Bowl's been here. The Aussie cricket's still going. We're going to have Robbo Robinson coming in to pick apart the NBL Finals. We're going to get into the UFC and the cricket with Brody Burrows. He's back from the Third Man Up podcast. And, of course, Mr. Consistent, Lachie Avil, will join us from Roundball, Australia to talk a lot of the football. And if we're lucky as well, we might even get some pop-ins from the great man behind the ones and the twos, JR Carter. We'll see how the show plays out. But let's kick it all off. It's time, as I do, to jump up on my soapbox and get into something that's really grinding my gears. Well, it's time to get on the soapbox, a bit of Macca's musing, and where else would we start this week than the Sam Kerr court case? Let's talk about it. It all started back in January 2023. Kerr and her partner, Kristie Mewis, a US international footballer, had a run-in with a taxi driver, you could say. Things got a little bit heated. Mewis even had to break a window to get out because they felt unsafe. They got dragged to Twickenham police station where they were going for help. The taxi driver wanted assistance with the dispute as well. Instead of getting support, the situation escalated. Here's where it gets a bit tricky. Sam allegedly called one of the officers effing stupid and white, which was recorded on body camera. She admits she said it. She insists it wasn't meant as a racial insult. Take from that what you will. She said she was frustrated and scared. Her defence is arguing the police handled everything poorly from the start and that Kerr and Mewis weren't taken seriously. Initially, it wasn't going to be a charge raised. The police then decided that they wanted to appeal, and a statement was forthcoming then from the constable involved. The jury's still deciding. There is a bigger conversation here, though, about how public figures are judged, not only about race and intent, but about how the authorities respond in a moment of crisis and how they're held responsible and to example for it. No matter the outcome, it's clear this one isn't just about the comment, but it's also about the piece of privilege, entitlement, and how a sporting star is judged in the public eye. It's a huge piece. It's undoubtedly going to have ramifications no matter the outcome of the court case, and that's what we wait and see. One, what happens with the charges? Are they upheld? Is there a serious punishment and a significant one that is held in terms of the incident that occurred? And three, what does it mean for the future of Kerr's career with the Matildas? In terms of it, I don't know the solution. I don't know the answer, but it's certainly going to be interesting to see what comes out of it for all of these pieces. And now, better than ever, let's drag in our co-hosts, our guests for Around the Grounds, and ask Brody Burrows from the Third Man Up podcast and James Carter, our man behind the buttons, or JR as he's better known to our friends. This is a big issue, Broads. But what I want to ask you, I don't want you to get into the politics of it. I want to know, in terms of Sam Kerr and the Matildas in the future, what does this mean? The Matildas are going to have a new manager soon as well. Does this put a line through Sam Kerr as a captain for the Matildas is probably the biggest question I've got to ask.
Yeah, it's a huge one, isn't it? I mean, she was the poster child, you'd call, of our last World Cup, even though she didn't really play and take the field until, until the busy end. But it's just such an interesting case. And over here in Australia, it's just completely blown up. And you hear a lot of people talk that, should she get the captaincy again? And then there's not really the exact examples of this being shown before. In sport, we've seen a lot of on-field issues that where players, they've served their ban. Look at Steve Smith in the cricket. Then he's now come back captaining the country. But then when it's like something off-field like this on a national scale, we probably haven't really seen it, especially here in Australia. We've seen it, I suppose you probably look at footballers in the past and also some basketballers, but not to the extent of this here in Australia and where it's been so widespread. And I think, for me, I think you will probably see a short ban with Sam at the moment. I don't think you can ever rule her out of future leadership because, as we've seen in the past, I mean, Australians have always done stuff, whether it's cricket, whether it's tennis. Look at Nick Kyrgios at the moment. He's coming back in the limelight, and love him, hate him. People come to tennis to watch him. So I think it's going to be one of those ones here now. I think, personally, short Matildas ban, whether that be 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, 12 months. But to say that she should never captain Australia again, I think we're jumping at shadows a little bit here.
Yeah, I think that's the case, but I have a feeling that, we've seen this pressure apply to national sporting teams and, almost hold them to a higher standard than we would expect them to hold a general member of the public or a person in the media, for example. So I have a funny feeling that we may not see her captain again, but I don't know that it'll be drawn as a direct bow to this. It'll be exactly as I alluded to. We've got a new manager coming in. We're planning for the future. Sam's getting towards the back sort of third of her career. She's injured. She's had injuries in the recent time. So what we're going to do is we're going to appoint a Mary Fowler, someone who's going to be part of that next generation, and Ellie Carpenter. They're probably the two lead candidates for my mind in terms of that next generation. And let's set it for the next, World Cup and a half cycle, which gets us through to say, 2031, something like that. That'll be the outward bound story, I think, in terms of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now's as good a time as any. I mean, let's be honest, the Matildas, despite all the hype from that World Cup, they haven't been playing their best football of late. And it does feel like it's that change is just starting to sweep through the side. So I think it's probably a good time as any, like you said, to not sweep the sheds, but bring in change and just bring in fresh life to the side.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's get around the grounds. I'm going to throw you a quick curveball because you just prompted me talking about tennis, and I know tennis is an area of passion for you. You talk about celebrities getting special treatment. There was a certain celebrity that got some special treatment. He made his pro tennis debut at 49 recently. Red Foo. What is going on here? I don't know how much of this you've caught, but who is giving Red Foo entries into any sort of tournament in tennis at 49 years of age?
See, a lot of people are saying this is his pro tennis debut, but they don't actually remember. He actually did a US Open qualifier for a qualifier back when he was dating Victoria Azarenka, and he was actually, as a youngster, part of the juniors tour. Obviously had tennis training, for a very long time. When Azarenka was often seen in her players' box and often hitting up with her, so. It's a weird one. At 49, I think he got beaten 6-love, 6-1 in Bernard Tomic time. But at the same time, how many more people probably come through the gates to watch Red Foo play tennis?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is bums on seat, and you're right. He did play in a that qualifying futures tennis tournament back in 2016, I think it would have been. So, and 6-love, 7-5, and a main draw doubles at a similar event. So he has played some professional tennis. It's a tenuous line, but it was more a humorous story than anything. There's hope for us yet, bro. Maybe you and I, we've got a few years to get to 49. Maybe we can still do it. Although he looks like he's in better nick already than me, so I'm in trouble.
Yeah, I think I've got to grow some hair or something.
Yeah, I'd just be standing there, just watching balls zip past me. Let's move on to some of the highest paid professional athletes in the world. The Super Bowl. It's just in the rear vision mirror, and it was probably one of the more surprising Super Bowls in certainly in my memory. Philadelphia Eagles absolutely blowing away the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes was made to look like he was a rookie quarterback. They trailed 24-0 at the break and ended up putting some respect on the scoreboard, I guess you'll call it, but still comprehensively beaten 40-22. No, it certainly didn't. You can't have an absolute humdinger every year, that is for sure. But there's a lot of people that were very happy to see the Chiefs not get a three-peat. We get very fatigued by repeat winners very quickly. But yeah, again, congratulations, Jalen Hurts. Set the record for the most rushing yards for a quarterback. He got the MVP. Saquon Barkley kicked over the 2,500 rushing yards for the season in the Super Bowl as well. So. It's just one of those pieces that you continue to see. These Eagles are going to be hard to beat, but as we know, lots of teams will be coming for them with the target on their back in 2025, 26, and we look forward to it. And we look forward, obviously, we touched on the news last week, some Super Bowl, hopefully quality teams coming to those games when they come to the MCG from 2026 onwards. So we'll wait and see. There's certainly lots of US sport coming. with it being revealed as well that we've got the NBA pre-season and the NHL coming back as well. So too much US sports, never enough, Broads. One person that we're not likely to see come another 2 seasons is Aaron Rodgers. The New York Jets have reportedly told him that he, at 41, if he wants to continue his career, it might be better that he looks elsewhere. He's been linked with the Steelers and the Raiders as the lead candidates. Interesting, the Steelers already have one aging quarterback and one rising kid in terms of their quarterback stocks. The Raiders makes a little bit more sense, but again, he's 41. There's only there's not many people that have played past that age to a successful level, and especially after he's come back from a pretty significant injury last year. It certainly is. There's always lots of moving pieces. We look forward to seeing them all. It'll give us some drama to talk about in these around the ground segments as we head on forward. I teased you before with an appearance of the illustrious man behind the ones and twos. We need to call on him now. We're going to talk some motorsport and ask, and he shall appear. JR Carter, we've rescued you, dragged you up from the buttons, mate. Good to have you back with your smiling face on the screen.
Good to be back, Chris.
You've always been here. You've been working all the magic that gets us to air every week. But as it is, we've been a little quiet on some of your stronger niche areas. But motorsport is certainly something that's starting to come into focus as we head into testing and pre-seasons. Unfortunately, testing and pre-seasons hasn't gone well for a couple of big names. Jorge Martin in the MotoGP's come unstuck and had some wrist fractures. But Lewis Hamilton in his new colours has had a bit of a prang, which is turning a few heads.
Yeah, so Lewis Hamilton, along with Charles Leclerc, were participating in the testing of previous hardware. So they get to do, I think it's like a couple of 100 hours, like in their old car, like between like anyone. So they can put that car around a track. And Lewis has decided, okay, yeah, going to test out this Ferrari, see how it goes. And it turns out it doesn't go as well as expected. It went into a wall. So Lewis's first appearance, I likened it to Kimi Lauder's first drive in a Ferrari, where he effectively just called it a shitbox. I think Lewis may have came out of feeling that way.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting in terms of it, but I don't think we can really judge him based on the old hardware, right? Like, we need to see when the testing starts and what he looks like in the new car. I mean, he's Lewis Hamilton. He's going to look good doing whatever he does, but it's all about the times.
That's right. We see 2025 testing in just over a week, I believe. So we'll know more information about this. Actually, no, 2 weeks. We've got just over a week till we see the F1 season launch, where they're going to have all the liveries show up at Wembley, which is going to be really cool to see. They've never done that before. So usually we have like just little individual media events as all that happens.
Yeah, it's certainly something to look forward to as we start seeing all of the releases and everything that comes with it as we head into it. It's a bit of theatre. It's a bit like the footy pre-seasons, Brody. We get to start seeing liveries. We get to start seeing people in cars. And in the lead-up, we'll get Drive to Survive. And then all of a sudden, we'll be in Melbourne. It certainly will be. That's where the rubber hits the road. Pardon the very poor. Speaking of F1 and drama, JR, Jack Doohan, we talked about this a few weeks ago. There's a lot of questions. We've seen Alpine team boss Oliver Oakes come out and say that Doohan will be given a fair chance to impress. Talked about signing young Colapinto, the Argentine Franco Colapinto as a reserve driver. He said, the media's been harsh on Jack. The stuff that was written by keyboard warriors there, he's getting his fair crack at it. That said, the early times aren't looking good. Colapinto between 0.2 to 0.5 of a second faster in some of their previous hardware testing.
Yeah, look, Jack Doohan is in danger at this point. Like, there's no doubt about it. Colapinto is going to be in that seat maybe before we get to Monaco. Like, it's going to be that brutal. Alpine doesn't have a great history of treating their driver signings with the greatest respect. We've seen the whole Oscar Piastri fiasco just over 4 years ago now, where they announced a driver and Oscar had no idea. So Alpine doesn't have a great track record of this, and like it's just harsh to see it happen to another Australian as well. Like Jack Doohan, Australian motorsport royalty in terms of like where like his family came from. For him to get such a poor treatment this early, I know that Alpine's doing the best thing for them, but they already had a driver signed for 2025. These teams probably just need to start sticking with it. I know Red Bull's got a habit of doing it too. Like, we haven't seen a Red Bull drive. Well, we've seen Perez sort of see the season out. Again, I don't think we're going to see a Red Bull driver see the season out. I think Liam Lawson's in danger as well. So watch the space in terms of the driver market already.
Yeah, I know you and I have been talking about it. We've already been trying to run our eye over the next crop of Red Bull talent as to who it's going to be. We believe it's definitely not going to be Yuki because of the way the engine deals are going. But all I can keep picturing when you're telling me that these young drivers are in danger is Ralph Wiggum in The Simpsons laughing and going, "I'm in danger." Am I wrong? Is that not? It almost seems a little idealistic and oblivious. These guys are just like, someone's giving me an F1 seat. Cool, I'll just go and take it, not realizing that I'm probably going to be hung, drawn, and quartered in 6 weeks' time if I haven't done exactly what they want, and what they want might be unachievable in the equipment they're giving me.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Maybe we're at a point where like they need to just spend time with these drivers developing, like these young kids, like just leave them in the car for a bit longer, develop the car around them. Don't try and force them to be part of the car. Like we've seen it with like McLaren, for as much as I dislike Lando, have stuck with Lando since he was a junior and built that car around Lando, and they have got results because of that. Like Lando is a genuine contender this year. Oscar has adapted to that car, so that's going to throw a spanner in the works as well. But yeah, just give these kids some development time, like in the car.
Yeah, I agree. At the end of the day, you're kind of setting them up to fail. They're not setting them for success in any real way. It's certainly going to be interesting. There'll continue to be stories. And speaking of that, the last story I want to part us on is Aston Martin trying to throw $2 billion at Max Verstappen a couple of weeks ago. So that one still peters out in the background, but I don't think that's going to happen because they don't have the hardware that he's going to need. So it's a weird and wonderful world F1, but there's going to be plenty of stories to come, Jay.
I reckon watch that space in the next 6 months because they do have the person that made all Max's hardware. So let's look at it from that perspective.
Well, it's certainly interesting. And to put it in perspective, he's on approximately £50 million at Red Bull, 99 million Australian. They're talking $200 million. I don't know about you, but geez, I'd take up about anything for 4 times the pay I'm on right now, Brody. Yeah, well, we'll wait and see what comes of it. As we said, the rumour mill will continue into the season and well through it, but we look forward to the F1 getting back underway. We might take a bit of a breather, Brody. I've got a couple of other sports to dig into you a little bit later in the show, so we might reunite at that point. And JR, as always, good to see your face back on the screen.
Thank you, Chris.
Was our panel take a breather before they come back into their pinch hitting? It's time to head to the basketball to get us well and truly underway. We are into NBL Finals, and when it's time to talk NBL, there's no one we'd rather have on the line than Tim Robbo Robinson. Robbo, welcome back to the show.
Chris, thanks, mate. Pleasure to be here and looking forward to the pointy end of the NBL season. It's been a long one, but geez, it's been an exciting one as well.
It certainly has been an exciting one. As I said, we're getting into finals. We're recording this on the night of the first play-in game. Getting things all happening, so we'll know a little bit, obviously, by the time viewers tune in around who's heading through, and we'll look at the map in a moment as to how it all plays out, because as we touched on last time, it's a little confusing. But quickly off the top, no surprise with NBL awards in the last couple of days. Bryce Cotton and Jason Tatum, the big winners.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this one, didn't we, leading into this a few weeks ago. Bryce Cotton, home and hosed, of course, as the MVP, 5-time MVP, mind you. How impressive is that? And well deserved. The way he's played the game, he's had 6 40-point games this season. He's pretty much carried the Wildcats on his shoulders game in, game out, and a well-deserved MVP. And our man down here in the Illawarra, Justin Tatum, it's his first full season as an NBL head coach, and he picks up Coach of the Year award, and well-deserved as well. They've led wire to wire, the Hawks, and Justin Tatum has been a huge part in making that happen. It's amazing what he's done with the group, and only a couple of changes this season for his group, and he's led them all the way to number 1 spot in the regular season.
Yeah, I think that's something to take our hats off to, what he's done there. He obviously came in partway through the season. He's done a phenomenal job. He's got a very impressive roster. Illawarra were well recognised across a number of the awards, and they're going to be hard to beat, and it's going to be an interesting shape-up in terms of that. It is time for the NBL Finals, and that means play-in games, as we talked about last time. So the teams in 3rd through 6th all play for their lives from here. 5 and 6 is a direct elimination when we look at it there, and you've got Sydney versus Adelaide. The loser goes, the winner heads on to play the loser of the game that's tonight over in Perth, which is Perth and South East Melbourne. So it's an interesting combination. Illawarra will essentially play the best of those bottom 3 teams, while Melbourne United will face up potentially in a crosstown rivalry against South East Melbourne if South East Melbourne can win over in Perth.
It's a hard one too, Chris. I think, normally being 1-2, it's a great advantage to go straight into a semi-final, but Illawarra and Melbourne are pretty much having a 3-week holiday now. It makes it really tough. They get time to, I guess, rest some bodies, which is a good thing. They get time to hit the training court together, which is a good thing, but how can they get the intensity of playoff basketball with such a long break? That's going to be the big test when it gets to the semis. But as you said, those play-in games are beginning tonight with that's game between Perth and the Phoenix. And, of course, I think it's going to be a tough one on either side of the draw. We see on Thursday Adelaide and Sydney. That's going to be an absolute beauty. The loser of tonight's game, as you mentioned, plays the winner of that Adelaide-Sydney game, and that's going to be another tough clash. So there's going to be no easy contest trying to book a spot in the semi-finals for those bottom 4 sides at all.
Certainly not. Obviously, the winner of that, the loser of that Perth game, Perth and South East Melbourne, will host the winner of the Sydney and Adelaide game. Sydney, they've been on the slide. A few games ago, they were in a spot to fight for a top 2 spot. They slid down to 5th. They were quite safe because there's a gap between them and Adelaide. Adelaide's been in good form. They lost their last 3, Sydney. They're now without Xavier Cooks. Jalen Adams looked like he might have been in trouble for an eye gouge, which even as a Sydney Kings fan, we were talking off air. I'm very surprised he managed to dodge that bullet. And if it wasn't finals, I feel like the judiciary might have been different. But without Cooks, it's going to be a huge ask for them against an Adelaide team that's clearly got on the right trajectory at the moment.
Yeah, provisional suspension for Cooks at the moment. That is a huge loss, obviously averaging a double-double per game for the Kings. He's such a big leader for them. And then you mentioned Jalen Adams. Well, he'll be there to play, and he can turn the game on its head. If Jalen Adams is on, he can make anything happen. And I'm in agreement with you. I know I'm a Hawks fan, you're a Kings fan, but that act the other night against Wani Swakala Bullock, I think every day of the week is a suspension in the game. But he was given the early guilty plea and a $1,550 fine, and he gets to play in a play-in. So I think you're right. If it wasn't a semi-final or a play-in game, I think he might have been spending some time on the sideline. But I think definitely without Cooks in that game, they're going to do it tough, the Sydney Kings, because Adelaide are rolling at the moment. The only thing that's going to hurt Adelaide is their defence. If they can't defend, they're going to put themselves under immense pressure. We know they can attack, but they let teams get on top of them by scoring too many points. So they're going to try and lock down in D against the Kings to try and get the job done.
Yeah, we certainly know Sydney have got plenty of shooters that can score, so it'll be interesting to see how that lines up. As we said, Perth and South East Melbourne, we know how that will, we'll know by the time we go to air how that will have played out. In terms of the top 2 sides, you talked on the big break being potentially an Achilles heel, because it is hard to maintain momentum, and it's something both sides had in the back end of the season. But going into this, do you see any of those other 4 sides? Who do you see as the biggest threat if they make their way through the play-ins?
Well, I think the worry for me, being an Illawarra fan as well, I mean, we finished number 1, but those teams that you mentioned that we could face, one could be South East Melbourne Phoenix if they were to make that way through. Another could be Adelaide. We haven't beaten either of those teams this season. So there's an Achilles heel right there for the Illawarra Hawks, knowing in the back of their mind that they haven't been able to get the job done against those sides yet. I think Perth as well is obviously another tough one. Doesn't matter which side of the draw they fall, because they've shown that they can match it with Melbourne United, and they've shown they can match it with Illawarra. So I think all those teams are alive. I know I'm sitting on the fence right now, but I think they're all in their own certain ways against teams have a chance to upset on their day.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see Sydney, as you said, a big hole with Cooks, all those other sides. Each of those sides has their own game winners as well, right? Like, that's the other thing, is if the right players catch fire on the right days, it puts you in a very different position. We talked about Bryce before, obviously, Jalen Adams, these sorts of guys that can turn it on. From a bums on seats point of view, I'm sure the NBL would love it if it was Melbourne, Southeast Melbourne, Illawarra, Sydney, because they would be absolutely ripping the doors off places to get in and get tickets. But whatever comes from here, it's certainly going to be a mouth-watering final series from here. Looking forward to what's on offer. It'd be a great story if Illawarra could go through, as you said, with Tatum in his first season as head coach. But we've got a few weeks of basketball that's going to be huge here in Australia, and certainly looking forward to it. One thing's for sure, you'll be happy it's not Cairns that you're having to take on in the finals as Illawarra fans.
Yeah, I tell you what, they've given us some scares, haven't they, this season, being at the bottom of the table, Cairns. Just on your previous comment as well, don't worry about those big stadiums. Don't worry about those big city places. The Hawks are holding 5,500 per game. We've had 6 sellouts this season. It's a club record. We're averaging the highest numbers that we ever have down here in the Illawarra, and they're packing out the stadium. There's bums on seats. So, it might not be the 14,000 or 15,000 that some of these bigger stadiums can sell, but the atmosphere is electric, and there is no room to move down here. So I don't mind those little stadiums, even if it is the playoffs. So the NBL can be happy about the Illawarra Hawks being in there.
I think the NBL should be pretty happy, because there's record numbers everywhere at the moment, which is phenomenal. It talked to the standard. We talked about what Larry and the team have done. They've built this up to, on the back of some good product and some great talent to continue to grow. And it's going to become a point over the next couple of seasons where if it isn't already, it's going to be the hottest ticket in town, these games. But looking forward to seeing how it plays out, where it all shapes up. It might be a bit tense next time we catch up if it is Illawarra, Sydney in a second. But either way, shall the better team win? While we're on Aussie hoops, mate, we might quickly have a quick chat about a couple of things happening in the NBA more broadly, and lead that off in terms of, obviously, the trade period over there. Ben Simmons on the move again. I'm very happy. He's back in red and blue. He's headed to the Clippers, which is his hometown colours of the Newcastle Falcons.
I actually like the move. I mean, we know, and we all read about Ben Simmons' struggles. He hasn't really kicked off from the guy that we once knew that took the NBA by storm and the Rookie of the Year, and been up there at the top with the draft picks. But I think this move's a good one. It's a fresh start for him, something that he really needs. He goes into a team that's doing well at the moment as well. And he's also joined by an Aussie counterpart in Paddy Mills. If that's not good news for Aussie basketball, I don't know what is. I mean, Paddy Mills has had such an influence on Australian basketball for so many years, and I think he could be just the man to help a player like Ben Simmons out, not only over there in the NBA, but maybe when it comes to the Boomers down the track as well.
Here's hoping. We wish him all the best of success. We want to see his name in the headlines for the right reasons. While we're talking LA, obviously the biggest conversation in the trade period is Luka Doncic. We saw him take the court. Didn't necessarily go to plan for him. The Lakers won, which at the end of the day is the end goal, but 1 from 7 from outside the arc and just 14 points. It's probably going to take him a little while to settle into this offense, you'd have to think, when there's some pretty big talent around him. He's no longer the only star on the court.
When you've got LeBron James in the team, it's always going to be a little bit tricky, isn't it? I mean, both of those are just great players of the game, and it's going to be interesting to see how they connect. But, a rough start. Those stats, 1 from 7 outside the three-point line, you can take that with what you will, because I know that he's got plenty to offer in the Lakers colours, and I'm sure he's going to exceed as his time goes on there. Looking at the flip side, Anthony Davis obviously picked up an injury in his first game, but he was quite elite as well. I mean, everyone thought that the Mavs got the raw end of the deal there, but he's been a pretty good signing for them to start. Disappointing that he got injured first up, though.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. A couple other talking points. Obviously, Jimmy Butler, one of the big names, moved from Miami to Oklahoma. We'll see how that one plays out. And Josh Giddey, there was a lot of talk about him on the Australian front being possibly traded out of Chicago. Chicago, they'll have doubled down and said he's their man and one of the ones they want to build around. And they let Zach LaVine go, which is no mean release in terms of securing Josh Giddey. So that looks good for his future.
Yeah, that's good news for Josh Giddey, and I think that's probably what he needs as a player, and he's probably more of a confidence player as well. So for the Chicago Bulls to make a move like that and say they're going to build the club around him, I think that's a huge boost for him, and hopefully he can settle in nicely and it works out for him.
Here's some Aussies dominating the NBA over the remainder of the season. We look forward to watching how Simmons goes in new colours, how Giddey continues on in his colours, as well as all the other Aussies that are over there. We're doing a wonderful job representing. And in the meantime, we've got the NBL Finals at home, up the Kings. I'm looking forward to it, mate. Hopefully it is Kings v Hawks, because I know there'll be a few messages going back and forth, I reckon.
I'll tell you what, it'll be a huge semi-finals, but we're very proud down here in the Illawarra. First time since 1979 that they've wrapped up top spot in the NBL. So hopefully they can go on with it and repeat the performance of 2001, our lone championship so far.
If they do, I'm sure Coach Tatum and the team will have the keys to the city. They'll be running amok down Wollongong Beach, and we look forward to seeing the antics. In the meantime, thank you again, mate, for your time, and we look forward to chatting some NBL again with you soon.
Thanks, Chris. Take care, mate.
Well, after we've bounced around the basketball with Robbo, it's time to head to the nets and get our man back on deck. The man from the Third Man Up podcast. He was in the around the grounds, and now he's coming in to dial in some heat, some chin music on the cricket. Brody Burrows, good to have you back in and ready to pull apart the summer and what's happening in cricket, mate.
Tell you what, mate, if you're going to be bowling some heat, don't want to be doing it in Sri Lanka with those kind of pitches anyway. But yeah, great win by the boys it was over there. Never in doubt, both tests. And I don't know about you, but just seeing that ground over there, I think it really reminds you how lucky we are here in Australia to have some quality cricket grounds and also stands to sit in as well over there. And I think one night they had 60 mils there overnight of rain, and then they were by 10 a.m. the outfield was dry enough to play. So in tough conditions, the boys got it done in a bit of a changed team compared to what we saw a couple of months ago.
Yeah, there's certainly some privileges of living in the first world. I don't know though. We don't have any forts at any of our grounds, which is that's kind of a cool addition to have. I'm not sure how we can go about designing one of those. Maybe we'll reinvent the whacker and get a fort for the Sheffield Shield, but we'll talk Sheffield Shield in a bit. The thing that's interesting, and I was listening to the Willow Talk podcast with your man from the Australian Open, bro. It's Feathers, Adam Peacock.
Yep.
And they were talking about the fact that so many of these teams, subcontinental teams now, actually aren't designed and built around actually high-quality spin bowling, and yet they keep dishing up these dust bowls, and we're seeing more and more. We saw New Zealand go over to India and sweep, or the Aussies in Sri Lanka. We're seeing more and more where the traditional teams that struggle in the subcontinent aren't struggling now. Is it time for these guys to, start actually dishing up better pitches where, the toss isn't heavily favoured and it's going to create a genuine contest?
I think it has to be. I mean, we saw it with Sri Lankan spinners. I mean, they put these spinners in the side, but you look at the amount of revs that were getting put on the ball, and it was always got to favour the Australian spinners. I mean, we've got good quality spinners. We saw Matty Kuhnemann come in, and if Matty Kuhnemann can turn it square, I think you and I might even, have a chance of turning a ball, but. Yeah, it's an interesting one there on subcontinent pitches because, you look at India now, the best fast bowler we've probably seen in the last 20, 30 years. Imagine they dish up a whacker-like pitch for Jasprit Bumrah. I mean, that's surely the way to go. If you've got the best fast bowler in the world, you start looking at the pitches you're dishing up.
Well, as you say, one of the two decks where they actually, the two best pace decks supposedly in Australia where we're playing Test cricket, we'll put an asterisk on Bellerive because we haven't seen much down there. Is where they won, right? Like, I know we didn't perform with the bat, the Indians, but the Aussies against the Indians, but the Indians, led by Bumrah, started with the ball. So, yeah, we're seeing more and more pace bowlers coming out of these countries. So it's an interesting piece that they continue to dish them up, and it's not working in their favour, as we saw. Another interesting stat I heard today, though, in terms of the test window for the last 2 years, 4 draws, I think the number was, in terms of all around the world, which just tells us that competitive pitches are now getting dished out a bit more. But again, they might need to find that fine line because we don't want to see too many 2 or 3 day tests. We'd love to see them going 4 and 5 more often, but it is a fine art. So the one thing that we can talk about is the Aussies have really performed there, and some personal highlights for me: Steve Smith finding some more runs, and Usman Khawaja getting his highest ever test score. I know a friend of our show, Menas, was calling for his head on his podcast a few weeks ago, but Usman's probably locked himself in for a little bit longer.
Yeah, he did. And that double tunnel, it was a classic Usman Khawaja performance, wasn't it? Using his feet just brilliantly against that spin. And he never really looked like, once he got to 40, he never looked like getting out. He looked exhausted at times, but at the same time, it was that class and composure that we really missed in this Australian summer. And it just goes to show that why he did look, maybe a little bit behind the eight ball here in Australia, those subcontinent pitches absolutely suit him to a T, where he can use his feet and he's just got soft hands, something which I think in the past, a lot of our Australian teams, they've gone really hard at the ball in subcontinent conditions and they often find themselves nicking off, but Uzi's always sort of had that up his sleeve, that ability just to play it softly in the edges that he does get, just doesn't carry the first or second slip. So, no, absolutely brilliant by Uzi to get his highest ever score.
Yeah, certainly great to see. And we saw Alex Carey get some runs, some debutants as well. It's certainly going really well for the Aussies. It's going to pose some interesting questions when we get to the makeup for the World Test Championship and then the subsequent tour as well to the West Indies. So we'll have a look at that. In terms of the Aussie cricket, though, as cricket keeps on doing, it keeps on rolling on, and the Australians now head to the one-day format. They've got 2 one-dayers in the lead up to the Champions Trophy. Interestingly enough, Sri Lanka not in the Champions Trophy, so these are just 2 one-dayers for them. It's not built up towards the competition, so it'll be interesting to see what they roll out in terms of side and certainly in terms of pitches.
Yeah, it will be. I know there's one guy I just want to quickly touch on. The whole time, I just wanted to see Beau Webster bowl some offies over there, and just to see if he could, come out and do the Cole Funky Miller and get a wicket with, with pace and spin, and he did that. So, well done to the slug from Snug. But yeah, the one-day international tour coming up, and look, Australia have been dominant in this form, haven't they? Except for that obviously series sweep, a loss against Pakistan. But when the time comes, when the big tournaments are on, Australia just seems to kick into gear. What Australia are going to roll out with, that's going to be the interesting thing, because it's not like they don't take these serious, these short little one-day international series, but you look at their record in tournaments compared to in series, and it's very interesting. So obviously Travis Head had that experience at the top of the order with the Test team. Whether that's going to go into his favour for the one-day internationals as well. I think it's just, one days, I don't know. I'd love to get your opinion on it, Chris. How do you feel about it? Because for me, I find it now hard sitting there watching a one-day international, just compared to obviously the toughness and the grind of a 5-day test, and then the bang and crash of a 2020. One-day internationals, or outside of a big tournament, it's getting harder and harder for me to watch.
Yeah, I feel outside of the World Cup, it's a struggle. I'm going to really battle with this Champions Trophy, to be honest. The time slots aren't all that favourable for us for a lot of the games. I think there's going to be a lot of nights where I'm just like, I'm going to tuck into bed and watch a bit of a abbreviated replay tomorrow. It might speak to our attention spans and how they're evolving more than anything in this modern world, Broads. But, at the end of the day, it's certainly going to be interesting to see. I think one-day cricket, as you say, is losing its impetus with the Aussie fans. And, it's certainly going to be interesting to see what the following becomes over the next cycle as well. For one-day cricket. One other thing I wanted to note too while we're on the one-day side, Marcus Stoinis randomly came out in the last week or so and just announced his one-day retirement. So I don't know if he was preempting that he might not have been getting picked for the Champions Trophy. He hasn't been in the greatest of form consistently in recent times. But I think he played 80 or 90 odd one-dayers for Australia, so we do doff our caps to him. It was a pretty solid career, and at his best, he was up there with Maxi for one of the best all-rounders in the world. But unfortunately, it was only glimpses we saw of that in the Australian colours.
Yeah, one of the few players who could open the batting and the bowling for Australia, and did so on a number of occasions. So that's the thing about Stoin. I mean, we've probably seen it with Maxi a little bit, but Maxi's been a little bit more consistent over the period. But the big Stoin, he's been responsible for some of Australia's best and most watched innings in one-day internationals, and also the shorter format too. So, well done to Big Stoin. Hopefully we'll see him in Big Bash and domestic cricket for years to come, though.
Fingers crossed, and that provides the perfect segue. Speaking of domestic cricket, the Sheffield Shield, right? You will be absolutely up and about if we have a think about where the ladder sits at the moment. South Australia, and again, good luck if you know how the points work in this competition, because the bonus points are all over the shop. 36.93 points they're on after another comprehensive win, and we'll pick apart the games in a minute. Victoria, who was sitting second going into the round just behind them, have lost. And what that actually means is there's now only less than 5 points separating second to sixth with 3 games remaining. there's a bigger gap between first and second than there is second to sixth. So South Australia very much their destiny in their own hands with 3 games to go. Essentially, I think if my maths is right, if they can outright win at least one of the games, they'll all but lock in the finals. And if they can beat Victoria and or Queensland, who are two of the 2 teams behind them, if they beat both of them, that should lock in a home final, which only a year or 2 ago would have seemed like an absolute fantasy for South Australian fans.
Mate, I'll be honest, it still feels like a fantasy. I've seen South Australia for so long get to this one and then just completely do what Stephen Bradbury's opponents did and just completely fall to the finish line and someone will come over the top of them. But yeah, no, it is great to see for South Australia at the moment, and it's really interesting. I mean, you look at the top 10 Sheffield Shield scorers this year, and the only one in the top 10 from South Australia is Henry Hunt. So it just goes to show you how dominant their bowls have been. I mean, look at Nathan McAndrew on the weekend, 7 for 11, and he's also been one of the most consistent ones with the stick as well. So he's having a cracking year.
He certainly is. 8 for 43 across the match. It was a phenomenal effort. It was an interesting game. The deck was questionable at best, where they clearly, dominated by. Well, it ended up being by 6 wickets, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, some of the pieces that we saw, like Ben Menenti, he got, I think, one of the opening batters in one of the innings, and yet all the other wickets were falling to pace. It was a very weird game, but as you said, Nathan McAndrew was the star as they bowled out WA for 66 in the second innings. There's nothing split the 2 teams. No single player reached 50. The high score 45 to Jason Sanger in the first innings. For South Australia, he's made a new home there quite well. But yeah, hats off to Nathan McAndrew, hats off to South Australia, hats off to their super coach in Ryan Harris. He stepped into some big shoes there, and he's absolutely making every post a winner, is the Rhino. In other games, Queensland reasonably comfortable winners over New South Wales. Some tons going around Reading for Matt Renshaw, which is a key piece for him as he continues to, I guess, fight for an opportunity to play in the test side. And another one who's been highly touted for a long time, Jack Edwards, 100 in the first innings, 50 in the second. So plenty to take away from that one as well. And Tassie getting it done in a very tight one against the Vicks. They only won by 20 runs in the end. They had to take a couple of late wickets to get that done. And yeah, again, but not a lot splitting those teams. It just shows how close the competition is.
Yeah, it's great to see also the resurgence of Jake Weatherall too. Obviously, the Shield highest run scorer and leaving South Australia, just needed a fresh start. He spoke about his sort of mental health issues and just needed some time away from the game and just a fresh start. Still plays for the Adelaide Strikers, still got plenty of obviously close mates there, but he's come back and he's been in ripping form down there in Tassie, which in the past hasn't always been the easiest batting deck too. So great to see Jakey Weatherall back in the runs.
Yeah, it certainly is great to see him getting back amongst it. Another one that was good to see, Kieran Elliott getting his first 10-wicket match haul for the Tassies as well, which is no mean feat. I think it's only about his 6th or 7th first-class game, so to pick up 10 for there was well done for him. And yeah, again, lots of good performances. Pete Hanscom doing what he does. He got a 90 there, but it wasn't enough to get the boys home after that ton from Jakey Weatherall in the second innings for the Tas Tigers. So as I said, it leaves it in a position for a Bradbury-esque performance from one of the dominant sides of the recent decades in WA and New South Wales. Either of them with a couple of wins can come from last and second last to even hosting the final, depending on other results, with just 3 games to go. So a bizarre result. WA, the dominant side, as I said, for the last couple of years, they haven't won a game in their last 4.
That's bizarre, isn't it? If you were to put money on a team at the start of the year, you would have put it on WA, and if you'd put it on the side to finish last, you would have put it on South Australia. But here we are, Sheffield Shield. But just want to throw one thing to you, mate. A bit of a curveball as well. Is Sam Constas obviously flown back from the test side over there in Sri Lanka and come in, and we saw him right at the end of I think it was at day 3, the reverse ramp and hit a 4, but. Obviously, he made his way into the side. Obviously, they had the twin tons earlier in the year against South Australia and in their only loss. And that was a draw, I'm pretty sure. But it was 100 off 300 balls and 150 off about the same. And then all of a sudden, it feels like he has to play this way. He has to play this exciting brand with the switch hits and the ramps. And if you've been following him for the last year or two, he's got in there, but it's grinding out an attack, and then he pounces, and then he goes big. But what are your thoughts on Sam Constas and potentially the Ashes next year?
I think Sam needs to find a way to harness his gears. We've seen both in T20 and in the Test match that he has an ability when he gets going to make some quick runs, but that's got to be. I think that's a tool in your toolkit. It's not your go-to. I think it's an opportunity to disrupt bowlers. If something, you're facing a Jasprit Bumrah, or even if New South Wales are playing Victoria or South Australia, and you're coming up against an informed bowler who just seems to be getting the wood over the team, then by all means try and throw them off their game, change gears a little bit, but don't make that your natural state. Because I don't think, I think we've seen players try and do that. We've seen Marnus, that test match where he tried to just grind out. That's not his natural state. His natural state is to be free flowing and scoring runs. So he needs to get back to scoring runs at that sort of manner rather than, and again with Consis, he was averaging over 50. He's still averaging after this game 49.6 or something like that, just under 50 in the Shield this season. So he's far from lost, but I think he could quite easily go down a slippery slope if he makes this his modus operandi, his normal state of flow. But I guess time will tell. He's obviously a phenomenal talent, prodigious. We've seen, he's got one of the great coaches in terms of players who can mentor him, as long as it's not about how to use DRS in Shane Watson. But, again, he could very quickly find himself on the outer. You've only got to talk to some of these players that have slipped off the radar. Matt Renshaw, we talked about him before. It's a quicker road out of the spotlight than it is into the spotlight. And I hope for Sam's sake, because we know the talent that he's got. We've seen that earlier in the season, that he just learns how to apply those gears. And again, I'm not going to profess to be the ultimate in terms of knowledge of how to execute this, but that's just the feel I get. And talking to other people that I value their opinions, and even yourself and I talking off air, that seems to be the vibe that we're getting. He's got that there, but use it as a strike weapon and use it as a trump card. But you don't have to play a trump card every time you play a hand.
Yeah, exactly. In different conditions, that's gonna. It might pay off sometimes, especially on flat wickets, but you're going to get those tricky conditions, or especially against the world's best bowlers, and they will get you eventually playing like that. So, especially in the Test arena. And I mean, you mentioned him before, Matt Renshaw coming off some big scores as well in the red ink. And we've seen him before, English conditions as well, does enjoy those. So, a couple more fails in Sheffield Shield and a couple more big scores from Matthew Renshaw. We will be talking about, a potential new spot.
He'd certainly be in the mix. You'd think there's plenty of names to go in there. We've seen what Inglis can do, McSweeney as well. There's lots of these players to throw in there. Another player who's going to have his name in lights when it comes to playing in English conditions, when it comes to the World Test Championship, is Michael Neser. Again, taking a wicket with the first over, opening the bowling for Queensland. And he just keeps on keeping on. Since the start of the 22-23 season, he's taken 9 wickets in the first over of an innings. The next best, that's in the Sheffield Shield, the next best has 3.
That is insane.
It's just a phenomenal record for one man to hold. And again, when you consider, it's not that he's a Stark-esque lightning quick bowler. He's not bowling 150 plus. It's just absolute accuracy and potency. And again, it just talks to how strong our bowling lineup is in any other probably era. Even those eras of Gillespie and co. He's probably forcing his way in at some point, especially when you consider how adept he is with the bat. He's a genuine sort of 7 or 8 in a batting lineup as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I had this conversation actually on the weekend with someone after a few beers as well, and we're talking about Michael Neser, and he's literally Chad Sayers. 5 or 6 years later. I mean, you think about Chad Sayers for 2 years. He broke the record for most Sheffield Shield wickets ever, and then the next year he beat his own record as well. So Chad Sayers in English conditions, it's very similar to Michael Neser. It would have been absolutely perfect. I mean, look at Dan Worrell when he went over there. He was just picking up wickets for fun, and Dan Worrell probably a good stepper all behind both of these ones. But Michael Neser as well, I think just one of the most unluckiest cricketers we've probably seen since Brad Hodge back in the day. I mean, can hold a stick more than well, can swing it around corners, and like you said, takes early wickets. And if he was to play for Australia, he probably wouldn't even get the new rock, which just seems absolutely bizarre. And yeah, Michael Neser, all forms. We've seen him perform in 2020 one-day internationals or the Marsh Cup and the Test arena, but hopefully his body can hold up over the next 12, 24 months. We don't know how long we will see him a part of this, but hopefully he can just have one full year, go over to England. We know he's done that before, take some wickets, and then potentially be in line for that 12th or 13th man, and who knows what will happen during an Ashes series.
It's certainly going to be interesting. I don't know whether he'll love. I'm sure he'd be happy that you compared him to Chad Sayers in a bowling sense, but maybe not in a batting sense. I think Nessa's batting average is almost double what Chad's is. But
actually, Chad Sayers made 242 not out in the local B grade the other weekend. Bit of a fun fact for you.
All being a park bully, but anyway. Michael Neser's got 176 not in a Sheffield Shield game. At the end of the day, again, both very quality bowlers. We're very light-hearted about how we take that on. But yeah, the other thing though, Michael Neser, unfortunately, like a lot of our Test team currently, the wrong end of the age spectrum. He turns 35 in only a matter of a couple of months. So still a few years in him. Just ask Aaron Rodgers. But in terms of that, let's move on from the Sheffield Shield. A couple of things to touch on before we wrap up. The Dubai Capitals have won the ILT20. Now, this is not a tournament I delved into the weeds of too much, but I just found it quite funny that this wrapped up a matter of just over a week after the Big Bash. And you can see a couple of faces there in that picture. David Warner and Sam Billings, who lost the Big Bash final for the Thunder, but have suddenly spun around the world and landed themselves in Dubai and won another trophy.
It's just bizarre, isn't it? I mean, you finished, 2 weeks ago? How many games? Is it you have to play 2 to qualify for finals? Is it just a free-flowing, anyone gets it anywhere? I'd love to know a little bit more background behind it, but it is just a weird one, this scheduling of so many of these 2020 tournaments. And I think, to be honest, it's just pulling the best players away from, the 2020 comps. And is it unfortunately, in maybe a year or two's time, and we've already seen a lot of the big names not come to the Big Bash anymore, is it going to affect that again in the future with obviously the Dubai money just blowing the Big Bash out the water?
Well, it's an interesting piece, right? Like you've got Dubai, you saw MI Cape Town win the South African T20 almost on the same day, and we saw Trent Boult 2 for 9 off 4 overs. That's phenomenal by anyone, but again, he's no spring chicken, Trent. I think mid 30s now, still a few years undoubtedly to come. But does it lead to that point? We've seen Bolt's a great example. He flits around the world playing for all of these MI franchises. Obviously, MI, for those who aren't, behind the cricket, terminology, is the Mumbai Indians, the IPL franchise. They've got franchises in the MLC. I think they've got one in the ILT20. They've got one, obviously, in the SAT20. The double-barrel question for you, Broads, is how do these teams manage their priorities if they're competing in the ILT20 and the SA20 at the same time? And does the Big Bash, if it wants to compete, have to seriously take a look at privatisation to some element? I know it means that we're probably going to be taking in Indian and maybe Saudi Arabian money depending on the situation. But is that the way, or do we just accept that we're going to essentially be a second-tier feeder competition for these teams?
No, I think, like you said, it's in the school holidays. People want to come to the cricket, especially at night. They want to see these big games. Unfortunately, you're seeing it everywhere. You're seeing it in combat sports. You're seeing it in nearly every single sport. In soccer now, once the money's there, that's where the best players are going to go. And if it is going to be that, then that's where our better Australian players will go eventually. If we are going to, I suppose, stick up for this, this moral right. But I think it is something that we're going to have to look at in the future down the track. I mean, imagine if, let's say, we suddenly did have access to some of the Indian 2020 players. Imagine with such a big audience here in Australia, imagine what the crowds of Big Bash will be like. All of a sudden, Virat Kohli's playing at the MCG in front of 95,000 in a Melbourne Derby. Just imagine that. It's something that I think we need to look at, and I would love to see that come into the Big Bash, but that's just me.
Give me more reason to dislike Virat Kohli if he starts playing for a Melbourne franchise.
They need all the help they can get, mate. Let's be honest.
I don't know that Virat's the answer then, but anyway, we'll wait and see. But I agree. I think, and not just the Indian players. We know, obviously, the BCCI is still very strict on their rules about Indian players going to play in some of these other leagues, even when the Indian teams are owning them. But maybe we'll be able to see some Indian development players, the rising stars, the South Africans. And I wouldn't mind seeing Trent Boult in Sydney Thunder Green. That'd certainly be nice to see. I don't know how much work he'd get out of the Sydney Showground wicket, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, it'd be great to see some of these names. We've seen them in glimpses in the past, but we're seeing less and less of them. It'll be an interesting piece. I've also got a bit of a view, which we can go on a rampage about another day, that we should actually incorporate with New Zealand and form a 10 or a 12 team comp in terms of the T20 to try and make it more attractive and get more Aussies and Kiwis involved. But we'll wait and see where that gets to. I think it makes sense in the future, but it's going to involve a lot of people giving up something. So the one thing we know is there's plenty more cricket to come. As we said, we've got those two one-dayers, up against Sri Lanka, and then the Champions Trophy, which we'll be digging right into next week. So in the meantime, mate, it's probably time to head out of the nets, go and take a breather, and we might jump into the ring or the octagon next to debrief what's going on in the Biff world.
Sounds good, mate. And you can't spell BCCI without ICC.
When we've made our way from the cricket nets, we're going to throw on the 14-ounce gloves and get into some heavy hitting now. Brody Burrows from the Third Man Up podcast is back with us. We've been getting our values worth out of your return today, Broads. It's time to pull apart the boxing and the UFC. How about we start in the octagon, mate? Downtown Sydney, the UFC 312. It was a huge card, a huge day. And off the top, the two defending champions certainly delivered.
They did. Dominant performances by them both. And I guess we'll start with Weili Zhang. And look, she just went and proved that she's, I think, the most dominant women's fighter on the planet right now. I mean, it was just pure domination over 5 rounds. Not much more can be said for that one. You know, it was predicted that way by many going in. And she just, no one's on her level, especially in that weight division right now. And at the moment, it's just a matter of watching what's next for her, who is next, and if they are next, they're going to need to take a big step up. Like, she's just so dominant. Her defense is unbelievable as well. You can try and take her down, and if you're going to do that, you're likely to cop something to the chin. So it was an absolute bloodbath in that one, and I can't wait to see her next fight. I would love to see her probably just she probably should have got the finish, if we're honest, though, in that one. That would have just topped it off, but yeah, and then the main event, mate, Sean Strickland. Honestly, I love the way he acts and he hypes it up better than anyone else in the current game right now. But he's all talk, and we saw that in his last fight as well. He's going to fight to the death, and then yes, his nose got split open, but for someone who was going to fight to the death, he did a bit of running away, especially once that happened. And Dricus just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think it's going to be really interesting because he's got the size and the game to go up a weight class and to see what's next for him. I mean, the other probably bigger talking point on the card, Justin Tafa getting knocked out, just doesn't look like a UFC. He's just not well-rounded enough, unfortunately, for these main cards anymore. And then Jimmy Crute, dominant first round, a 10-8, an easy 10-8 in the first round. And then a majority draw, which was interesting, but he probably did at least lose one definitely, and one was sort of on the edge. So unfortunately, when you leave it up to the judges, there's only so much you can sort of be angry about. But it was great to see Jimmy back in the octagon. You could see the ovation he got from Australia, and they didn't like the majority draw, a lot of the fans there. But I think UFC 312, it was a good card, but I don't think there was enough of the highlight fighters. There was a lot of grinders on the card.
Yeah, it was interesting to listen to the conversation, and I heard an interview with Chris Minns and Dana White, which Dana was obviously heavily criticised for in terms of coming on that and how funding works, and we all know that governments pay for these things. Let's not kid ourselves. It's a commercial arrangement to try and drive tourism and entertainment in their region, and it's as we've seen with the NFL and other announcements, it's an us versus them, and we've got the event, they don't. Melbourne clearly winning that at the moment, but Sydney hanging on with the UFC. It's one of those things, though, in terms of trying to find the right balances when it comes to the matchmaking and finding those, balances across the cards, making sure that, and Dana White talked about it, not over-concentrating just Aussie fighters as well, making sure that there's a mix, especially in a country that is as multicultural as Australia is. And from that point of view, Du Plessis was a warm reception, as was Strickland. There's some people that love and hate them both, and that's what they pay for seats for. The other one I want to talk about, though, before we let it go, was the opening fight of the card, and young Aussie from WA, Quinton Zalkild,
Yep,
name for it. 19 seconds, if what I read is correct, the second fastest official knockout on a UFC card. He might be a bit of a name to watch. It could just be a flash in the pan, but it's a bloody good story either way.
absolutely. And about 8 o'clock Perth time in the morning, so nothing like getting sat on your bum 8 o'clock in the morning. So great performance by him. It was kicking off the card. It's never easy for anyone, especially with the time differences. I mean, if you're on an early prelim over in the US, you're coming in and you're fighting at about 2 o'clock, maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You're doing it here in Australia, and due to the time zones, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. So well done to him as well. Kicked it off nice and early, and you could see at that time there was a lot of Australians in the crowd celebrating with a beer in hand. I thought that was absolutely brilliant with the Breakfast of Champions, and it's going to be great to see. Obviously, an early knockout. That's what Dana White wants when he's matching, doing these matches in the future. I mean, you do the right things. You grind out a majority draw. You're probably not going to be getting put on those high, those earlier prelims or the prelims, or maybe even if someone was to pull out, you get an early knockout and all of a sudden it does start opening who knows what kind of doors. So he's done the right thing, and exciting to see where he is in about 6 months' time.
Certainly is. He's a name to watch. If nothing else, there's a few people that were rushing to their seats and just catching that action. So, as you said, it was a bit of a surprise for all. But let's move from the octagon on to the boxing. We'll turn our eyes back to UFC when we head to 313 and some other stories that'll amount in the coming weeks. But there's plenty happening in the boxing world. And let's start with the brothers Tszyu, Tim and Nikita, both looking at their next fights and what shapes up. Tim looking at what some are selling as a blockbuster against Joey Spencer. What are your thoughts on the next steps for these two?
Yeah, look, Timmy, unfortunately, his last 12 months just has been a nightmare. I thought it was extremely, extremely silly by his management to put him in with the Russian killer, and look what happened inside that first round. It was, and Tim said himself, it felt like he was getting hit by bricks. Obviously, we saw how bad that cut was in his world title loss to the Inferno, the Towering Inferno. But it's just, yeah, I wouldn't call it a blockbuster at the moment. I think Tim's star at the moment, it's faded quite a bit when you consider, obviously still such a big name here in Australia, but over in the US, where the big fights are, he's not getting looked at. He's not being spoken about in the same way that he was a year ago. And his brother, on the other hand, he's probably the rising star and the one that people are starting to talk about. Who, if you told everyone 1 or 2 years ago that was going to be the case, they would have told you were crazy. When he was, he looked all right, but he wasn't that killer that we've seen as soon as he starts seeing blood. So I reckon, yeah, it's not a blockbuster. It's a good fight, and no doubt, No Limit will hype it up as such, as they're good at, making everything a blockbuster fight. But I don't think it's a blockbuster. It's one that Timmy Tszyu should win within 5.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting one. The other one, obviously, Nikita, you touched on. There's a bit of bad blood between Tim and Michael Zarafa. There's basically a 50-50 chance that Zarafa will be the next opponent for Nikita, as much as he's campaigning for a fight with Tim. It looks like it'll either be him or Brock Jarvis. Either way, an all Aussie absolute stoush. It's supposed to be in March at the ICC. It'll be a hot ticket, that one, as you said. Nikita on the rise, and both Zarafa and Jarvis are names that'll put bums on seats against him.
Yeah, we actually had Zarafa in the Blue Zone studio earlier. He was mates with one of the presenters that we had on the couch, and he's still pushing for this Tim fight hard. Every media outlet he goes on, every phone call, every interview, he wants this Tim Tszyu fight. But really, he pulled out that last minute. It's on him. He had his moment to really push his name up into lights, and for a reason that he still hasn't really come out and been completely honest with. I don't feel. And until he does that, the smartest thing for him to say was, had a shit fight camp. I needed to be better if I'm going to face Tim Tszyu. There wouldn't be all this stuff surrounding him now, but he's always now going to be known as the guy who pulled out within 48 hours.
Yeah, it was all. What was the story at the time? COVID travel concerns, I think, and then we saw Tim Tszyu quoted in sort of late last year saying, "I'll never forget the fact that we're sitting a week out from the fight, and he does a bitch move like that when we've been getting prepped for months. I promised my grandpa back then that this F-wit is never getting another opportunity." So I'm sure it would be some warm the cockles of the Tszyu family hearts if Zarafa and Nikita were to fight and Nikita was to sit him on his backside. And look, I think that'll be a good fight. So I would certainly be, if it fits the schedule, be looking to try and get there in terms of the pretty boy, as I think Tim Tszyu called him at the time, Zarafa. So it's interesting. There's always bad blood in boxing. We love it. That's what makes it so interesting. But yeah, it certainly shapes up into some good fight stories. The other one that's a big fight story at the moment is certainly Canelo Alvarez. He's always a name that's around the headlines, and he and his team are keeping themselves in there.
Yep, and I'm very much surprised you said Canelo and it wasn't Logan Paul fighting Jake Paul, mate. So well done on that one. I'll say on this conversation.
Don't get too excited. I know how passionate you are about the Paul brothers.
Oh, mate, do not get me started. Logan should stay in WWE. But yeah, Canelo. I mean, what else has he got to prove in this game, to be honest? I mean, we saw the heavyweight fights, obviously not that long ago. Fury, I think he's going to take a step back. We're not going to see him fight. But Canelo, I mean, what else does he need to do? It's just at that point now. I mean, I think the Tim fight's gone. For Tim, I'd like to hear your opinion on that, mate. But yeah, it's going to be interesting the next 12 months for Canelo.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting shape, especially with him, I guess changing the shape of his management team as well. And, we can see that the Saudis are getting their money into boxing. And that's kind of where it's going. And, at the end of the day, I don't blame him. Take the money rather than fighting Jake Paul, get some more and, maybe have a semi-legitimate, boxing fight. And it looks like he'll fight Skull. So that'll be William Skull in May. Cinco de Mayo, nice little cultural tie-in. So it's certainly going to be an interesting one. And there's lots going on in that space. But, yeah, I think the Zoo piece has departed. I think Canelo's going to be on to other different things. And there's, certainly some big fights coming, though, as you said, despite some of those people departing. The other one is the Mexican Monster, one of the great nicknames. And it looks like he's going to have a big fight in 2025 after knocking over David Morrell the other week. So watching out for Benavidez and what he brings next, because he packs a punch, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely, mate. And that's the thing about world boxing at the moment is when you take out these so-called super fights that they're making up, they're sort of making out with these exhibitions and that, there is really good boxing on at the core, which I think just really needs to be promoted a lot more in the general sports headlines rather than these footballers boxing footballers or reality stars boxing on with reality stars. There's so many good fighters. I think it's probably at the moment the most well-rounded divisions we've ever seen. I mean, we've got stars everywhere. We've got entertainers. We've got we've got knockout artists everywhere. We've got so many talented technical boxers as well, but we just need to promote it more, and we need boxing to get back to the early 2000s. I think the and probably late 90s as well, when it was at its biggest and at its best. Saudi money, I hate to say it, that could be a good thing with all of this. I think they've got the promotion behind it. We saw all the promotion behind Fury as well, obviously. But yeah, I think it's something that we got to pay a lot more attention to as consumers as well, and get out of the entertainment and into the actual sport business.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think we've talked about it before. Separate the two, codify, entertainment, prize fighters, whatever you want to call it, and boxing as separate things. I'm interested to see this Benavidez story, though. He's also called out Canelo, so we could have an all Mexican grudge match, which would be really cool. I think he's also he likes to call out.
He's called out everyone, hasn't he? Let's be honest.
Eubank, and then obviously we've got this fight coming up in about a week's time between Beterbiev and Bivol, who it looks like that's the likely outcome for him. But one thing is he's going to keep punching up headlines, UFC style. So we'll keep watching them, and if we get that all Mexican superstar fight, that will the Saudis will pay big money. Unfortunately, it probably won't be in Mexico. It'll probably be in Riyadh.
Yeah.
The pay-per-views in Mexico I don't think there'll be many Mexican eyes not on the TV for that one.
Yeah, I think that'll be huge, and that's what we want. If we're honest, it's the up and comer who is calling, like you said, he's calling out everyone and not turning down fights. You see a lot of boxers are very tactical with the ones that they take. And you're seeing even less, I think, now. I mean, unless you're a challenger calling out someone, you don't see the real top tier boxers aren't going and calling out everyone like he is. And I love it. It's how you get the big money in boxing, combat sports, anything. Yeah, if you can promote a fight, if you're not afraid to take a fight, whether it's last minute, whether that's jumping in, with a 2-week fight camp, and doing something good, that's where the money is.
Certainly is. There'll be plenty of headlines and plenty of money splashed about. Let's keep an eye on the boxing, not so much the entertainment fighting. And, mate, in the meantime, you just keep fighting the good fight there in the sweltering heat of the Eyre Peninsula, and we look forward to chatting with you in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks, mate. She's a nice and balmy 44 out there right now with 47 tomorrow. So I'll be enjoying a little bit of sunbaking and cooling off.
He's enjoying the Fujitsu aircon and kicking along, right? Tubby Taylor style.
The sex symbol of the commentary team, as it was called in the was it the 12th man boned?
Oh, look, his rig gives us all hope that again, we look forward to chatting to you again soon, mate.
Thanks, mate.
Closing out what is a huge show, it is time to turn back to our Mr. Consistent. Lachie Avil joins us again from Round Ball Australia. He's back and ready to pick apart the A-League. Good to have you back, Loch.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
It's the A-League Fast Five again. We're going to pick through the 5 talking points and topics from last week ahead and everything in between for the A-League. It was hard to drill it down to 5, but I don't think we can start anywhere else. But what I can only describe as one of the most phenomenally perfect derbies of all time in Sydney last weekend, Sydney and Western Sydney, it had a little bit of everything.
Yeah, probably, we're talking like top 10 A-League all-time games, at least in the regular season, right? Obviously, finals brings with it a different kind of atmosphere and tension. But no, for a regular season game and just a derby, it just had absolutely everything. It was literally just the best of what the A-League can be. You got two teams who not only have this really great support and intensity behind their fandom at these kind of games. Just incredibly quality football as well. Anthony Caceres, that assist that he had, the outside of the boot through to Patrick Klimala for the first goal. That's just world class. And the football all night was superb. The teams going at each other very hard. Zach Sapsford, who seems to just absolutely love this fixture, puts something extra on his Weet-Bix every morning when he gets up to play in a Sydney derby. Scored 2 goals and assists, could have had a hat-trick as well. Just these stories all over the park were exceptional, and the best the A-League can get for me.
Superb. We were sort of watching it vicariously while everything was going on at Hunter Stadium at McDonald Jones there, and it was interesting to sort of see the roller coaster. One of the guys working with us at the Jets is actually a Sydney fan, and he was dejected at 3-1, absolutely ecstatic at 3-3, and it was interesting having that conversation of how would you have felt if I'd offered you 3-3 at the start of the day? And he kind of said, well, a little disappointed, but now I'm ecstatic. And that's the wonders of football, right? A few goals and some emotion at, midway points of a game can very much change what's a good outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And, gauging the reaction, like obviously for the Wanderers, it's so brutal to lose that game. Well, not lose the game, but obviously it felt like a loss, right? To go down from 3-1 to 3-3 so late in the piece. But also from where they've come from in the first 2 derbies this season, you could sense that a lot of fans were a little bit more satisfied in the way the players went out and played and fought for the shirt, fought for the badge and for the West of Sydney. And so there's actually a fair bit of satisfaction on both sides in terms of how it played out, which makes it all the more disappointing that this is the last derby of the season and we have to go, months and months and months until we get another one, because I think that would have been perfect. Maybe that's just setting the field for a game in the final series as well. Wouldn't that be something? But
3v6 in the finals or 4v5, it is very open, and we'll talk about the latter in a sec. So yeah, it's the frustrating part though, and there's probably not as many headline encounters over the next couple of weeks, but then hopefully in the last few rounds, as things really start to iron themselves out, the ladder's almost too congested at the moment for games to mean as much as you might think they do, even though a couple of losses can quickly then see you go from 3rd to 8th or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, like 3rd all the way, I think it's the Phoenix and the Mariners. I can't remember which way around they are in like 9th. Like even that they're not a million miles away, right? 2 sides that have been a bit off the pace. I know we're drifting a little bit here, but they're all in the mix, right? And so, yes, we don't get these kind of big name derbies. We've talked about this plenty, but we are getting more of those narratives of like, okay, these are 2 teams who are close to each other. There's a lot on the line. It's a 6-pointer. We've got some other things going on. Sydney FC probably could have started Douglas Costa in this game if it wasn't for the fact that they've got a massive round of 16 game in the Champions League this week that they were targeting his return for. So yes, no more derbies. It's sad, but there's a lot more going on.
There's a lot more going on, and there's a lot going on the weekend, and that included all 6 of the teams below 7th taking points from their, which is just phenomenal. You look at the ladder and you just talk about who hasn't lost in their last 5 games. There's only one team, and that's Central Coast. They're 9th. The other form teams, Auckland, 4 games without loss. Wellington, 4 games without loss. Newcastle, 3 games without loss. 3 of those 4 in-form teams sit in the bottom 5 spots on the ladder. Speaking of Newcastle, Noah James, 5 years between starting appearances. He came back, and Newcastle won 3-0, admittedly 3 goals in a very prolonged stoppage period because of the incident that did occur at the stadium. But what a return from Noah. He had to pull out some really good saves to keep Melbourne Victory at bay. You've got your Melbourne Victory colours on. I think, there's sometimes you see a goalkeeper come back in, their team wins, but they didn't have to do a lot. Noah had a few key moments. There wasn't dozens of them, but there was a few key moments where he came up with some, certainly high-level saves that belong in the A-League.
Yeah, no, I thought he was superb. And, the Jets' game plan coming into this, it's clear, and this happens to Melbourne Victory a lot, is that if you can sustain them for a half of football, then they open up at the back end. They play a really high line with players and defenders that maybe don't suit that style of play. So when people get a little bit tired, as we saw right towards the end of the game, those balls in behind become a lot more available for teams to kill the victory off with. So, for Noah, the job was to come in and just keep the Jets in the game, because victory, the Jets did play better, but the victory dominated that first half. So many more final third entries, so many more shots on goal and attacking opportunities. And a big part of the reason why it was 0-0 at half time was because of Noah James. So, superb for him to come in. That's not easy, I'm sure. And that game he did play against Wellington back in the COVID days was behind closed doors as well. So as much as he has had an A-League debut, he hasn't played in front of fans before. So I'm sure that was a bit of a wild experience for him.
He should hang up his gloves now, because he is 2 from 2, both 3-0 under his goalkeepership. A couple of nice things, obviously, for the Jets. They lost, well, it wasn't a nice thing, but they lost Phil Cancard to injury. Thomas Aquilina dropped back into the defensive line and stood up really well, which is positive when you have Aquilina and Grozos as your defensive combination. With Mark Natter, you've got two guys who aren't naturally backline players. They're probably more defensive or midfield players, defensive mid or midfield. And the other thing that I liked, which was a really nice moment, the first person to race out and embrace Noah James and celebrate him was Ryan Scott. That goes to talk to the kind of guy Ryan Scott is. He could have quite easily been dejected, and after getting dropped after back-to-back draws, so it wasn't even losses. But again, it looked like they're starting to settle on that right combination. Mizunuma looked really good for the Jets as well, as did Lachlan Rose, both coming on a bit earlier than they were probably projected to. So maybe some positive signs, or maybe I'm just a really glass half full at the Newcastle Jets sort of guy.
No, I mean, it's funny. It's because all of these teams, as you say, towards the bottom of the table, have been trending upwards. Like, you're completely right. I'm looking at the form list now of the bottom 5 teams. So the Mariners all the way down to the Raw. All of those teams last 3 games. There's only 2 losses in there, which is just ridiculous. And it goes to show the balance in this league. And as much as we kind of love to throw around the line, anyone can beat anyone on their day, this season's actually proving it more than most. So, the Jets are one of these teams that absolutely have come on since the January window. Kota, what a player he seems to be, right? I was talking about balls in behind. He's a wizard with the ball at his feet, putting that ball long ways. So he's been a great addition. LA Rose coming back from injury has made a big impact as well, obviously getting on the score sheet here. So, funnily enough, for a lot of these teams down the bottom, and including the Jets, there are some interesting signs of optimism for sure.
Certainly is. There's going to be a few of these teams that are going to like to play spoiler later in the season in terms of teams fighting for finals. On the counter of that, we've got 2 sides streaking away at the top of the ladder. I'm going to ask you a question here. Auckland and Adelaide, is the A-League Men's Premiership already a 2-horse race?
I'm not prepared to say yes just yet. We've still got a little bit more of the race to run. They have 11 games left. So they do have a game on most of the field as well, which helps the case, but it's not quite there. And look, Auckland are dealing with some injuries at the moment. We know Nenad Pineacker is going to be out as well. So that's going to mean a central defensive partnership that they didn't start the year with probably Tommy Smith and Hiroki Sakai. So they're going to have to adapt in terms of what their defensive line looks like. And the defense has been their strength. They've only conceded 12 goals all season. And then when you look at the Adelaide lineup, they're doing okay for injuries, but they've just lost a bunch of players to the under-20 Asian Cup. We're thinking of the likes of Paniotis, Kikianis, Luka Jovanovic, Fabian Taladera, Johnny Yule as well. Kikianis is the big one, but all 4 players have made their impact this season. That's a large core to take away. So they've built up a pretty good padding for themselves. It's 5 points from Adelaide in second to Western in third. But they're also coming into a period now where their squad has been affected, and there's a couple of teams below them like Western and Sydney that seem like they're on the up. So it's not quite a 2-horse race, but they've definitely put themselves in a very good position.
Sounds like you're kind of sitting on the fence there, Lachie. When I look at this, outside of Western United, and again, you talked about it with MacArthur the other day that maybe they're a little bit higher than their form really dictates, and I wonder if Western United, not significantly so, I'm not saying they're not a finals team, but just in terms of what they can deliver over their remaining 10 games. You go back to Sydney and Macarthur, they're 2 games behind at Auckland and Adelaide. You start to do the maths on what these teams need to do. And when you have a look at, Sydney down to Melbourne City and realise that the most any of these teams have claimed out of their last 15 points is 8, and some of them as few as 5 and 6, you're starting to paint a picture that, it's now or never if they are going to make that move. You feel if, a couple more losses, like if we look at a Sydney or a Macarthur, if they were to lose or not take, say 4 points out of their next 2 games, irrespective of who they're playing, and you add in that Champions League game for Sydney, it starts to become a challenging run home in terms of, you start to really lose touch with Auckland and Adelaide if they pick up sort of 4 to 6 points from their catch-up games, because all of a sudden, if Auckland are to pick up 6 points from those 2 games, the gap's 14 points to Sydney. Admittedly, if they lose them, it's a different story, and there's a lot of ifs and buts in there, but yeah, I think it's Auckland and Adelaide to lose. I think mathematically possible, but it's Auckland and Adelaide to lose.
For sure. But to that argument as well, I'd argue that Auckland and Adelaide have overperformed what their performances may suggest as well. We think about Auckland and the very soft fixture run they had to start their campaign. Yes, they didn't consider goal for a while, but they had a lot of fixtures at home. But if you take their away form, they're only 5th on the table, right? So they have to travel this week. I know that we're not really touching on the fixtures too much, but they're going to Tunny this week to play Western United. So if they win this game, then yes, that puts a big gap between them. But their away form, especially with the outs that we were talking about, that opens the door for Western United, and they are a team that is in good form. So I would expect a Western win, to be honest. That's who I'm looking at to win that fixture. And if that does eventuate, well, then that brings Auckland back down to the pack a little bit, and it makes things very interesting.
Certainly does. I think the next 2 to 3 games are going to be really crucial. It could be make or break for a lot of those sides in the top 6 or 7 in terms of their aspirations for, higher honours or locking in double chances and home semi-finals. Speaking of handing out titles already, let's head to the women. Melbourne City, through 16 games, are undefeated. Again, they look like they're in third gear against Newcastle on the weekend, won 2-0 quite comfortably. We know on paper they're an absolutely stacked lineup. They are 7 points clear. Admittedly, the teams behind them, in this case, have the game in hand. But at the end of the day, the only way teams catch them is by someone's got to knock them off. If they don't drop, either a game or draw a lot of games on the way home, there's no way. Actually, I think they have to lose at least 1, if not 2 games to not win this title.
Yeah, probably. And they're just coming off a run of beating Western United and drawing with Melbourne Victory as well. So there are a couple of their direct opponents that they've managed to fend off. So not only do they have to drop points, but a lot of the teams below them have missed out on the opportunity to win those direct head-to-head games and climb those kind of 6-pointers. So this one, I'm much more willing to say, yeah, we probably could just hand out the title to them. And I think it's credit to just the quality of the organisation and the background processes at Melbourne City, because, Michael Matriciani has come in and he has pretty good pedigree as a coach coming in from South Australia, obviously. But the quality of the players, the training resources, the centre that they've got out there in Casey, the Melbourne City women's football organisation is very well set up. And it just shows that when you've got a machine that's well oiled, someone like Matriciani can come in and just have an instant success. So we know how dominant they were last year. They, barely lost too many games last year, and now they come in and haven't even lost a game this season, which is pretty incredible. I still think it might happen. To go invincible through a whole season is insane. There's still a lot of high pressure games to come. But in terms of locking up the premiership, then I can't really see anyone catching them from here.
Certainly going to be interesting. And in terms of those teams chasing, we know Brisbane Roar got off to a flyer. They're part of a big Sunday in the A-League women's fixtures, where we see a couple of the top 6 sides. There's the games this weekend. Realistically, I think the sides from sort of 2 through to 7, there's 3 matches that involve them. And when we have a look at the ladder, there's 4 teams undefeated in their last 5 games in this league, which is phenomenal. And then throwing Canberra, who haven't lost in their last 4. You got Victory versus Mariners. Mariners, surprisingly, they love a draw, but they've only lost 3 times this season. The only teams that have lost less games than them are City and Victory. This one's going to be a huge one. Obviously, it's down in Melbourne, which gives Victory the leg up in the early game. But then the other one is Brisbane versus Western United. As I said, Brisbane, they were nipping at the heels of Victory, and City, I think they're in front of Victory coming through the Christmas New Year period from memory. They've lost 4 of their last 5. Something's gone a little bit wrong there. Obviously, we know about the injury to Sian Fryer. That's a big out for them. But one player shouldn't be making that much difference. How do you see those two key games playing out?
Yeah, look, one player can make a big difference. It's tough because there shouldn't be her to be the one relied on to score the goals, right? And that shouldn't be the way it is. But sometimes, depending on the run of form with different players, that's what it can be, and it becomes really tough. And yeah, you're right. They came out of the gate really hard. And now they're falling down a bit. And, you're talking about the Mariners only having to lose 3 games. The Brisbane Roar still haven't drawn a game. We're still on the watch for their first draw of the season. But yeah, it's tough to see what's going to stop this run. In terms of the Mariners, you can put another tally in the cliche counter because we'd like to say that defence wins championships. And despite the fact that Melbourne City are the undefeated team in the league, the Mariners have conceded less goals than them. So I buy into that theory a lot over the course of a league, and then when you come towards finals, having a really solid defense is going to tend to put you in good situations more often than not. So yeah, I don't mind the Mariners in this one. I know they have a tough outfit against the Victory, but just having that solid defense really means a lot for me. So I really think these both games could go either way. Probably Western United, you'd have to say, are going to be favourites against the Roar just because of that recent form. But in terms of the Mariners and Victory, that's going to be a high quality match, and that could go either way.
Yeah, the Raw are going to need to have a look. I agree in terms of Central Coast and Victory game. I think it could go either way, and if Central Coast can turn the screws defensively, that's going to be a key piece. But for the Raw, it's really interesting, as you say. Obviously, no draws yet, but that probably points to me when you look at, I guess what the expectation was, that the way they've delivered, they've probably left some points on the table in a couple of these games, I feel, which could become crucial when you have a look. And Canberra's only 2 points behind them now. They could be this weekend, only sort of 5 weeks from being second and possibly in a spot to knock Melbourne City off or close the gap to less than a game when they had that week where they played them and Melbourne Victory. They could be outside of the top 6 very quickly. And if they don't turn it around, and as you said, well, it doesn't all fall on Sian Price. She's been the assist provider for a lot of her sister's goals, or a scorer herself in that run. So they need to find something and something soon. Otherwise, they're going to have the likes of Canberra United leaping over them. There's a lot of teams in form.
Mm-hmm.
They need to turn it around quickly with just 7 games to go. But we'll watch it from this space. It's interesting. There's a great weekend of football, men's and women's. There's lots happening, and then that's going to head into some Matilda's soccer not far around the corner as well, which is really exciting. So we look forward to that. But for now, we might let you go and take a breather and switch to one of your other sports outside of the Chris Macpherson show. Head off to hockey training, mate. So thank you again.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.
Well, it's been a huge episode. We've been around the grounds giving you your black and white of all your sports thanks to our wonderful crew. No grey opinions. A big thank you to Tim Robbo Robinson covering off the basketball. Brody Burrows pinch hitting all around the world, the cricket, the boxing, the UFC, and around the grounds talking Sam Kerr and some other pieces. And, of course, Mr. Consistent, Lachie Avil from Round Ball Australia. And our man on the ones and twos, he made another cameo today. Great to have him on board. JR Carter, he runs all the magic that keeps us flowing and coming to you each week. We had, as I said, a huge show, so much to cover off, from Sam Kerr to Noah James, Dana White and Usman Khawaja, and lots in between. I never thought I'd put those 4 all in a sentence together, but there it is. Of course, you can keep up with everything that we cover off on in between episodes on X or Twitter, depending on which framework you want to put around it, TikTok, Facebook and Instagram. The Chris Mack Show is the handle where you can find us. And of course on YouTube, where we drop our weekly episodes and some clips and snippets as well throughout the week. If you're tuning in on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell down below so that you can get the alerts every time something drops into your feed and keep up to date with all of our black and white across your sporting landscape. Until next week, keep enjoying your sports, keep on tuning in, and we look forward to bringing you another episode of the Chris Macpherson Show next Thursday at 6 p.m.